Welcome again in the last session of this series, and in this series we will talk a little more about what is additional important for us in style sheets, CSS, and a little bit on JavaScript side, and then we will say bye-bye to each other. So a little more work on the graphics. We did transform and we realized that scale works nicely on SVG graphs compared to canvas graphs, because canvas graphs are pixelating. Now we can make it more interesting by adding transitions, which will give us a feeling of animation, right? We can use animation directly, or transform with transition will make it animated. So I have simply added a transition on transform property for 5 seconds on SVG, and transform was already there on canvas, and I have done what transition on transform for 5 seconds on canvas as well. And I see the page, and let me refresh this, and then I start hovering over the image here, created the graphics created by canvas, and you will see very quickly it starts pixelating. Pixelation means the block kind of things that you see. It is no more looking like a dot, because a line is made up of infinite number of dots, right? But it is no more looking like a dot, but a rectangular block. Now if I come out, it will go back to its normal position. Fine. Now if I do the same on the SVG, we will see that when it is increasing in size, immediately it is slowly pixelating, but it is recalculating and recovering from the pixelation, and it is giving us so nice uniform look even after scale. You see, during the transition, it is pixelating for a while, but it recovers immediately. So it starts with little pixelation, but as soon as it is growing or compacting, it will recover the state very quickly. Fine. So this is how we can use styles with HTML together to get a very interesting animated look and feel for our content. Okay, let's take a look at something more that is present in styles. Grid layout. We actually did grid layout in responsive web design. And for that, we used a few of the style properties, like first of all, we created a row, and then we created columns, and we had styles for columns, width, where the whole screen was divided into multiple columns, usually 12 columns. And for each of them, we had to specify width. And then we said we used actually float property and then clear property, etc., right? So we created our grid, a row column structure using the regular style properties that we know. Styles or CSS gives you a very nice ready-made way of creating grid structure. And you have to start using them by following few steps. The first step is to create a grid container. So an element has to act like a grid container, which is going to have multiple children, of course, which is like a table with multiple rows and columns, right? So grid is as good as a table, but you have to have a parent, a container. And how do you do that? You set the display style for that element to either grid or inline grid. If you can recall, display has many possible values, and we have already used many. None to hide the element, block, inline block, table, etc. So now we see display grid, which will automatically lay the elements or the children elements of this container element in a grid structure. Okay, so this is the first requirement. Then second thing is, as I was explaining, all direct children will be automatically laid out as grid items. Then you have few other properties which will help you decide the columns and rows and content, and then rest of the things like spacing between columns, etc. So grid template columns property can be used to specify the width of the column. And you can also specify how many columns are there by specifying width as many times. So you say you specified 4 width, altogether it should be adding up to 100%, or if it is in pixels that you can do. However, the number of values that you specify will automatically become the number of columns. And then grid template rows will say for each row what will be the height of the row. So you can specify the height property indirectly for the row here. Then justify content will let you align the whole grid inside the container. And there are many more properties. So in the short story is, if you start using display style, or if you start setting display style to grid on any element, the children element, all child element will be laid out in columns and rows automatically, right? And this will be a responsive grid. So you don't have to really create a grid structure using the 12 column thing that we did earlier, which looked a little complicated. However, it was quite useful for us. It gives us that grid structure out of the box. CSS helps with that. So I'm not doing the example here, but you can search for grid layout in CSS and you will see a lot of examples on internet, and you will make use of it. The next interesting thing that I learned about styling is the use of var function. We have already used many functions when we were specifying some property of a style, some value of a style property, I mean. For example, when you are specifying color, you say RGB and then R, comma, G, comma, V, values for them. Similarly, HSL function, ATTR function for attributes value, and like that you have many ready-made functions. One function that I liked is a var function, which helps you declare some variables, custom variables, of course. Variables are the names that you give. So you can define a bunch of custom variables and then use them elsewhere. The advantage of that is you can reuse a value in multiple places. Take an example. Here, if I want to have same scale for this and this, now I have to make it consistent. Say 0, 10, 10. And I have 10 to be written at 4 places. This is too much. And suppose I have to change that 10 to 15 or 20, I will have to make changes at so many places. And it is highly likely that I will make a mistake. Now, if I have a way to define this as a variable and use them like that, then it will be easy, right? Okay, so let me take that route. So generally variables are defined with a minus sign so that it is not confused with other inbuilt variables. So inbuilt properties, I mean. So what I am doing is I am defining a class, and it is actually not looking like a class because it is a state where it's a pseudo class. Okay, it's a pseudo class. I'm not defining a class, I'm defining a pseudo class, and then I say what? A variable name. Say scale factor, and I say 10.0. All right. So now what I do is I'll start using this in other places using the var function. And in the var function, I will put this in quotes, and then I will see if it works. And if it works, I will start using in other places too. So let me go back to this, and it works? No, it doesn't. So what I have to do is change this pseudo function to pseudo class to root, and then try again. Something is wrong. Let me go to CSS var function and see the example. Okay, I'm here, and I'm var custom name okay, maybe double minus is something that I will have to use. I'll just check. I'm just doing some experiments. I have not used it so much, but I found this interesting. Yes, so there are conventions to be followed. The property name or the variable name should begin with a double minus. And is it necessary to define this as root? Can I do it like my vars? I really don't know. Let us see. Yeah, so that is also a convention to be followed. Actually, it's a rule. The variables must be defined in a pseudo class called root. Okay, so remember these rules. Pseudo class has to be root, and then you can define as many variables as you want, and you say scale factor something and minus minus. Okay. Let me say another property, and I say transition time, and I say 5 seconds, and I use this in these places. Okay, and I say var trans time, and here also trans time, and these scales here as well. Right, I did this, and it works. It works on all of them, right? All places. Now, if I change this value at one place, say 2, and then come back, and then the scale should be going up to double only, right? It will only double in size. Now this is so quick and easy for me. I am just setting the value or changing the value at one place, and it becomes effective at so many places, right? So this var function given in styling will help us define a whole lot of global variables inside our styles where we think the values will change, and then we can really make it effective in multiple places. Okay. So var function of style is very useful. Remember the rule, var should be defined in a class, a pseudo class with the name root, and each variable should be named with a minus minus at the beginning. Okay, this is how it is. All right, the second interesting function that I found in CSS is calc function, or which is called calculation. Now, if I want to do some property additions, I want to specify some property, but I want to do it together by doing some mathematical operations like plus, minus, multiplication, and division. If I have something which is a value, and then I want to derive another value by performing certain calculation. For example, you see width is being calculated and it is saying 100% minus 100 pixel. Now 100% is a relative value, so it depends on the screen width. And if your screen width is varying, but you still want to have the width of your element 100 pixel less than whatever is the screen width, you can use the calc function. So let us try and use it here. In this, I have this canvas, and I say, well, UI canvas, and I want, let me try it on circle. So in circle, I had height and width, fine. So I say, well, for you, the height should be calc 100%, 50%, let's say 50% minus 100 pixel more than 50%. Okay, and same is the case for width. And I'm not making, so height and width are disproportionate, so it will be rectangular but proportionate to height and width, half of the height plus 100 pixel and half of the width plus 100 pixel. So that is how it will begin. So if I do this, will it work? It worked. How? This second image is shifted. All right, so let me put up a border around the SVG so that it becomes visible. Okay, so this will now show you how big that SVG is. Okay, now if I say, well, position is relative, and then I use position has to be specified, then I say top has to be calculated of what? ATTR width divided by 2. Will it work? I am using a couple of functions together. Let us see. It doesn't work. ATTR width is has to be a property of screen. So screen dot width, will it work? Screen. Let us see. I'm trying to do something complicated which I have never tried earlier. No, it doesn't work this way. So ATTR doesn't work. So let us say, I say again 50% minus 100 pixel, something like this. Just some calculation. So top position, $100 pixel, it should get pushed downward, I thought. Yeah. So why is calc not working here? Maybe 50% is not a value that it can count on. So it is to be applicable. When I say percent, it has to be relative to itself, but top cannot be percentage. It has to be absolute. Okay. So I say 20 into 10 pixel. Will it work? Let us see. It has to be 200 pixel that way. So 20 into 10 pixel it doesn't work. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake again. So these are obvious typing mistakes that happen. So 20 into 10, it doesn't work again. So I'll have to be very careful in using calc, whether it will work or not. 20 pixel into this, will it do? No. So calc may not work in all cases, like top, etc. I say 200 pixel, and left I say 100 pixel, and then this is now positioned elsewhere, and then I do this dimension increase decrease. Okay, so I can use calc function in some cases, and I found it interesting. You can use 4 operators, plus, minus, slash, and star, which are all arithmetic calculation operators. Okay, so that is on this part of the styling, some additional properties, but we have got the opportunity to create a lot of styles on our own, but for our help, there are some good people in the world who have created a whole lot of ready-made style, and we can use those style libraries, and the most popular of them is Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is, as I said, is the most popular and most used style library. It gives you a hell lot of ready-made styles, and then grid structure, and it is responsive by design. So it is a very, very rich library. It also has support for icons, and you can use icons. We talked about icons earlier in our very early sessions, and we say there are 4 basic elements in web applications: text, image, color, and icon. We talked about all 3 but icon, but if you use Bootstrap, you can make use of ready-made icons quite easily. Okay, glyphicons are there, and Font Awesome provides a lot of ready-made icons. But when you are using Bootstrap, you can integrate them very easily out of the box. So how will you integrate Bootstrap in your website? So in your web page, you have to add a link, and that link, of course, has to be a relationship style sheet, because what you are going to do is you are going to refer to a CSS file which is hosted somewhere on the internet. So you have 2 choices basically. You can download the library of Bootstrap and have it locally as if you have defined your own CSS files, and in that case your href will point to the CSS, Bootstrap CSS that is available locally in one of your subfolders, or you can point to a publicly available library which is hosted here. And there are advantages of using something called CDN. You see, this is Bootstrap CDN. CDN is centralized distribution network. So there are some advantages of using the CDN version than the local version. And rest of the thing that you see here, cross origin and integrity, etc., are to be ignored. These are optional properties. What is important for link is rel and href, and you may also specify the content type. Type was text CSS. That is optional, because CSS is known to have type text CSS. Okay, I was talking about advantage of using CDN. So when you use a CDN link, it is downloaded. Of course, you have to have an internet. Your client should have internet working. Internet. If you have hosted your application on intranet, that can work without internet, but most of the time your client will have internet. Okay, so if your client has the internet, this will work and this will get downloaded, but this will be stored in the browser cache. So next time if there is another page which is requiring this same CSS file, it will first look into the local cache and it will not download. So your downloading will be faster, your loading of the page will be faster. And if you have browsed some other website where this exact same resource was downloaded, even then you don't have to download again. So your client gets a faster, better experience most likely if you are using CDN. But the drawback is it will work only if your client has the internet. In other words, if you have a local copy, your client will not require to have internet. But the drawback is every time that local copy will be downloaded with the page, and that may slow down your page experience or page loading. Bootstrap has primarily got a lot of ready-made styles. So you will have to learn about Bootstrap and its classes and its uses, etc. So it's a learning on its own. However, Bootstrap also provides some special features, and for that it requires JavaScript library references, and it is going to use a few JavaScript libraries like jQuery. jQuery is a ready-made library that is used independent of Bootstrap as well, but Bootstrap has its own JavaScript library, and Bootstrap is also using Popper library. So you may have to add these three scripts or JavaScript references in your Bootstrap based application. You can learn about Bootstrap separately. There are plenty of reading material and practice material available online, and this is a good area of learning for you. Next, popular style library is from W3, the World Wide Web Consortium, and they are calling it W3.css. This is also quite popular, and it is free of cost. You don't have to pay. It is again giving you almost same features as Bootstrap, but of course style, class names will be different, appearance will also differ. So you have to choose Bootstrap or CSS, W3 CSS. Interestingly, you can use multiple libraries also together. So you can have your own library plus Bootstrap plus W3 CSS and few more. Because each of these libraries will use a unique name, so it will hardly contradict or conflict, and you will be able to use multiple styles together. However, these are big libraries which has features for almost everything that you would want to style, so you will generally not require to mix things. If you are using Bootstrap, probably that is going to be enough, or if you are going to use W3 CSS, that will be enough. And of course, you can create your own additional style. You can override the default implementations. So you have the base power of CSS still with you. I'm sorry. So you still have that power. So for including or embedding W3 CSS, you will have to again add a link to W3 CSS. You can download and make it a local copy. Fine. So that is about special things in CSS. Now let's take a quick look at JavaScript, or something that is special in JavaScript. Well, our knowledge of JavaScript as of date is very minimal. We did not even go into the structural part of JavaScript. However, I'm listing few features which are something that you cannot skip when you are writing web applications. You cannot think of web applications without having these features utilized from JavaScript. The first one is AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. primarily that's a technology that was introduced to have a client server communication in asynchronous mode. I told you about form element in HTML, which is used to collect users information and then send it to server, and then server will give you the response. Another way of navigation was a typical click on anchor tag. So two ways of navigation, but both will do what? It will change the URL, it will reload the entire page. Now AJAX works in the background. So if you want to get some new content or you want to send some content to the back end without refreshing the whole page, you can do that. You can just create an AJAX request and then send data along with that request, and server will accept that. Or if you want to receive something from server, you send a request, because you have to initiate the request, and server will send some data in response. And then because AJAX works inside JavaScript, the data that you received or the content that you received from server is available in the JavaScript, and using the JavaScript's power of manipulating the DOM, you can place that content wherever you want. So it will be so transparent that you won't even realize that something has changed, and it is changing because of your communication with a remote server. So reading data to and from, reading data from server, sending data to server after the page is loaded fully without reloading the page completely, updating a portion of the page without reloading the page, or sending the data to the server in the background. These are the advantages of AJAX. And nowadays, no web application practically which is dynamic in nature can be thought without using AJAX. So this is a very powerful and very commonly used feature of AJAX. The next feature is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So you're now familiar with JavaScript objects. How do you know something is JavaScript? A variable which has a value which is written in a pair of curly braces. If it is written in a big pair of big bracket, then that is an array object. Otherwise, it's a regular JavaScript object. But you can observe that JavaScript object is a key value pair. You have object already seen that. But key and value will generally be a text. Even if it is a number, it can be considered like a text, right? Even if it is a date, it can be written like a text. So JavaScript objects are nothing but a combination or a collection of key and value which are text individually. So it's a whole bunch of text written in a particular format which can be easily transferred from client to server and from server to client. So transporting data between client and server becomes easier because it has less of overhead. If you go back to AJAX, it said JavaScript, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Well, XML is a text file structure which is very similar to HTML in the look, where you will have tags and the content. But you know, in HTML, tags will have no value if it is not processed by the browser. And that is like extra thing with the content. It has been observed that many a times tags are only useful to distinguish the content, and if I use a simpler notation, then it becomes lesser in size, yet it gives me the way to distinguish. And JavaScript objects use that notation which is simpler, like a pair of curly braces, then a colon to distinguish or to separate the name from value, and a semicolon to separate one pair of name value from the other. So these are simple notations which are easy to write and smaller in size. So your overall data that is transferred becomes smaller, and it is easier to translate your data into JavaScript, and from JavaScript it is easier to translate into a plain text. So JavaScript object notation is quite commonly used format of data transfer nowadays. So AJAX with JavaScript object notation or AJAX with JSON and not XML is quite a common structure these days for exchanging data between client and server asynchronously. JavaScript object notation or JSON is also used as configuration files and data store. And as I was explaining you earlier about web storage, JavaScript object notation can be used there as well. So your values or data that you are storing can be a JSON or stringified JSON. That's JSON which is converted into a string format. You can see it in a string format, right? So it's a self-describing, easy to understand and lightweight data format for storing as well as transportation. So JSON is going to be with you for quite long. Next thing about JavaScript is the latest version of JavaScript, which is commonly called ES6, but formally it is named as ECMAScript 2015 or ES 2015, or sometimes called ECMAScript 2015, ECMA for ECMA. So this is the latest updates put up in the specification of JavaScript, and the earlier version was ES5, which was standardized in 2009. This one was standardized in 2015. So officially it is called ES 2015 or ECMAScript 2015, but commonly it is called ES6. So you may hear the term ES6 quite a lot. And in fact, I have been using that. Few of the special features of ES6 we have used in a very short JavaScript part that we did, like arrow function and like what? Did we use? Yes, arrow function was the primary thing that we used. Did we use anything else? I don't recall. Anyway, so there are so many features introduced. Yes, we used a lot of new functions added to array object like filter, map, but that is new APIs. What is the constructional updates in ES6? So JavaScript is by default not object oriented. I think I mentioned that earlier, but ES6 gives you a way to think of JavaScript code, and not just think, but write JavaScript code following the object-oriented programming principles. So you define classes, interfaces, you do extensions, you write properties and methods and constructor, and so many things that you would do usually in a typical object-oriented programming language. That is one big change in JavaScript world by having ES 2015. And then whole lot of new concepts like spread operator, and like we used the arrow function that is quite useful, and a lot of new APIs were introduced. So there are plenty of features added to ES6 which will give you a whole lot of power, additional power in JavaScript based programming. Now that JavaScript is not only for web programming in the form of manipulating the HTML, it is used to write very rich server-side code also. Your ES6 construct will help write very rich and robust server-side program as well. It has introduced the concept of promises and so many other things. I'm not going into the details because our knowledge of JavaScript at this stage is bare minimum. We can do a separate learning session on JavaScript to gain more and more knowledge and awareness about JavaScript features. but that means we'll be requiring more programming awareness and programming knowledge. So I am not doing that right now. Okay. Next important thing about JavaScript is Node.js. As I said, JavaScript is not anymore for only client-side programming or web programming. You can use JavaScript to build standalone applications as well. Standalone means which does not require a browser. You can write simple console-based applications, or you can write the backend web server. Web servers can be built using JavaScript. And for that, the base technology is Node.js. So it's a runtime, a JavaScript runtime, which is built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. So Chrome built something new, and on top of that, Node.js was built as a runtime environment, and now that is one of the most competing and popular runtime environment where JavaScript has gone server side. So it is no more a client side scripting language, it has become a server side programming language. There's a difference between scripting and programming language. Scripting is lightweight, it is used for small work. Programming languages are heavier in their construct, heavier in their libraries, out of the box features, but it gives you a lot of capacity in other terms. So now JavaScript has grown to become a server-side programming language with the advent of Node.js-like technology. Now, Node.js is open source, so you don't have to pay for using Node.js. The only thing that you'll have to do is go on a Node.js website, download the binaries for your operating system and start using it. Of course, you will have to learn to use Node.js and learn to write JavaScript code which will work on Node.js. But as it is open source, there are millions of contributors, and Node.js is library based. So you have libraries like plugins, and then you can add more and more plugins and reuse them. In fact, you can create your own plugins and contribute. But where will you contribute and where will you get those contributions for use? There is a library called NPM, which is explained as Node Package Manager. So it is the world's largest software library, as it claims. And it's a package manager and installer. NPM is also a library in its own, which is required to package and install Node-related libraries. So you create your library, you package it using NPM, you have to install other libraries and update or uninstall later if you don't need it again, you will use NPM. So NPM comes integrated with Node.js binaries when you download. But NPM is also a portal where contributions are made available, and contributions are not coming from freelancers only. Large organizations are also contributing their libraries on NPM. For example, if you have to do a lot of work in AWS, Amazon Web Services, the cloud platform, you can create a lot of applications using their library, the Node.js library they have contributed on NPM. So NPM is growing very fast. Okay, so NPM and Node.js will help you build server-side programs, and AJAX and JSON will make it better on the client side, and ES6 is the glue between these all, because ES6 helps you write much more stronger structured programs. So there are some ready-made libraries and frameworks available and very popular in the market. Let's take a look at that. AngularJS. Now you may have heard of Angular or AngularJS. Angular helps you extend the HTML that is available. Now, so far we have not exhausted our options with HTML elements. So we may not feel the need of having something more than what we have in HTML. But if you start creating more complicated web applications, you will hit a day where you will think, well, the HTML elements that are coming out of the box are not good enough. I should have a way to create my own HTML lookalike so that I can reuse them in my applications that I'm building. I'm building multiple applications or an application where a piece of visualization is getting repeatedly used, and I wish I have a simpler way to define it as a library and then use it as if I'm using any other HTML element. Okay, so Angular helps you do that. So Angular helps you extend the HTML, and it is basically giving you ways to define your own functionalities that can be used in HTML applications. But it is a third-party library. It is open source till now. So, and it is promoted by Google. So you can download Angular libraries and start using it. Angular has grown pretty rapidly. In last couple of years, it has launched version 1 to version 9, and from between version 1 and 2, there was a drastic architectural change. In fact, they changed the name also. The first version, they said AngularJS. Now they have dropped the word, the part JS, and they are calling themselves Angular. So Angular 2 onwards is a very different structure, and internally it is also using a superset of JavaScript called Typescript. JavaScript, if you recall, I said JavaScript is loosely typed. The type of the variable is decided at the runtime, and it can change during execution also. So you started using a variable by specifying nothing, so it is the type is undefined. Type of that variable will be undefined. Then you specified a text, and the type of becomes a string, and then you specified an array, so type of becomes object. So this is variable, and this is so dynamic, but it is little obstructive in writing complicated, complex programs, because if you do not have type predictability, your applications may misbehave, or your error handling or exception handling may not be that powerful. So that's one primary advantage with typed object-oriented programming languages like JavaScript. And before ES6 was formally adopted by most of the browsers, Microsoft came up with a technology called Typescript, which is the superset of JavaScript. So it had all features of JavaScript, plus added the object-oriented programming concepts, like I said, classes, inheritance, polymorphism, etc., etc., and then added strict typing of data, and that is why the name Typescript. So Angular uses Typescript now instead of JavaScript. So that's additional learning if you are going to use Angular. The next very, very popular JavaScript library is React. Earlier, it was also named as React.js. Now they have dropped the JS and they are saying React. This is promoted by Facebook. So two competing large companies, Angular is promoted by Google, while React is promoted by Facebook. Both of them serves the same purpose, extending the core HTML functionalities by allowing you to define new components and new functionalities. Right. So React is a simpler, lightweight JavaScript library which does not have complicated things out of the box, and it is always available as an add-on, but it is a UI library, basically a UI library where you create new UI components and use it. Uh, Purpose-wise, both are same, but the way these two are implemented, the architecture, the philosophy are pretty different from each other, and sometimes they actually uh, oppose each other. So it's a very different library that you will have to learn and learn separately. Angular and React are equally popular among web developers and very uh, these skills are very high in demand. So if you are learning Angular or React or both, you will be quite powerful in terms of your knowledge. So these are some ready-made server client-side libraries that are available. I'm not talking about server-side libraries, which we'll cover if we go further deep in Node.js and its related libraries that are available on NPM. So now that you know JavaScript, you know HTML, you know styling, you are good web developer. But web development is not just creating the front end or something which is called the client-side application, because it may not be enough. You may have to have a requirement to build dynamic applications. Like I said earlier, 80% of the time you will have static web pages, and for that, primarily JavaScript is even not required. You will use HTML and CSS, and that is enough. But for the remaining 20% of the time where you will create dynamic applications, you will have to create very rich UI, and then you require JavaScript, and then you require ready-made CSS because you will spend a lot of time otherwise writing your own styles. So it is better to reuse, and then you have to use very complicated components. So instead of creating it on your own and maybe making it reusable, you will depend on a technology like React or Angular to create reusable components so that your code is leaner and more mature. That is one part, but dynamic applications deal with a lot of data, and data has to be stored somewhere else so that it is centralized, plus it is accessible from various clients in the same way. You may be trying to use the same application on your mobile phone one day and on a computer another day, and maybe on a different computer when you are in the office or somewhere else. You want to have same data accessible to you even if your client device has changed. That means the data has to be stored somewhere else. That means that is a machine which is remote, and that machine should be able to handle your request or data that you submit or data that you request for properly. And it has to not just serve you, it has to serve many customers like you. Okay, so there is a whole bunch of application requirements on the server side, the other side, the remote side, which is to be written. And for that, you need a server-side technology. There are plenty of server-side technologies available, but with Node.js, you can still use your knowledge of JavaScript if the server-side application is built using Node. And you can still be a client and server-side web developer. Then the third part is the database. You need to know database, and that is a whole different technology world. But nowadays, there is a concept of document-based database, and documents are something that you are seeing on the client right now. You are familiar with document object, which is the document object model. Okay, so there are databases which stores the data in the same form as you see, and JSON is also a document of or object model, right? So you can store data in JSON format as it is, or a document as it is. Maybe document, maybe a web page, or a Word file or Excel file. So files as it is. So there are such database technologies growing, And if you are going to use something like MongoDB, which allows you to store data in JSON format, which is again a JavaScript, you are going to be a full stack developer. The stack is client, server, and storage. So you can use your JavaScript knowledge all along to build a nice client side application, to build a server side application, and to handle or manage your data in databases like MongoDB. So your knowledge of JavaScript will help you become super powerful so that you are able to do everything on your own without knowing variety or without requiring to know other varieties. Having said that, knowledge of other technologies are always going to help you become more mature in your life. Now, when you have such complicated development requirement, your Notepad or Notepad++ will not be good enough. So you will require a little more intelligent IDE or integrated development environment. I will recommend you to use Visual Studio Code, which is open source, though it is built by Microsoft. It is available as open source tool. You can download it from its website. I've given the link here. You can download it and simply start using it even without installation. So it is a big competition to Eclipse, which has been a very popular IDE for Java based application development. Now here we are not developing Java but JavaScript based applications mostly, or web applications. So Visual Studio Code has a whole lot of features out of the box for web application development, and in addition to that it has freely available plugins for other technologies like Java, like Python, like PHP and others. And it is growing very fast and very quick, lightweight. So I will strongly recommend you guys to do your programming work. Even if you have to do a simple website creation, I will suggest you to use Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code has excellent TypeScript functionalities also added, and you can simply add more and more. It's very expandable in its own structure. Right, so I will suggest you to use Visual Studio Code now for all your website development, even if you are doing a simple website creation using only HTML and CSS, because this tool will give you a whole lot of helpful suggestions as well as easier way to manage your code, folder structure, and it will help you with lot of error prompts, some compilation errors, which will help you build your site faster and nicer. Okay, so that is pretty much the end of our course. Any questions before we end our 2 weeks interaction? It has been a great journey for me, at least. So this course was brought to you by JRS Excellence, and you can visit our website to know more about us, backed by our software development venture with Technologies. So you can see our website of the company as well. All right, so I think you enjoyed this session, and if you have any more questions, you can post your questions and comments on our YouTube channel, or you can send it directly to us through our contact email IDs published on our websites, jrsonline.in and rethyono.com. Thank you so much, guys. Have a nice learning of web development going forward. Thank you once again for being with me.